Are you testing? Good. Thank you. I'm a little bit nervous, so hang on. I'm glad to see a lot of you here, and I think you probably all realize we're all gardeners, because it doesn't matter if you're doing vegetable gardening, flower gardening, farming on a big scale, or if it's just water gardening or houseplants. Everybody enjoys gardening anymore. If any of you have any specific questions, let me know if I need to hit on certain areas that you particularly are interested in. I'll start with a little bit about myself. I came originally from Europe, from Holland, excuse me, and at 3 years old started gardening, which is common there. And one of the things from then, you kind of get a love of gardening and go from there. In the schools, everybody there in grade school has a little plot of a garden, and after school, all their activities are not done during school time, and it doesn't matter if it's sports or anything else, it's all after school. You're given the seeds, and then they all have a little section, and you're taught how to go ahead and sow your seeds and how to take care of them, and then you get to harvest them and give them away, which teaches a lot of things at once. And I'd like to see the schools here do that, because it's not done at all. I think that love of gardening stays with you forever. And when you learn it when you're little, it's there, and that's the best thing you can do for the next generation, is pass it on when the kids are little. Don't have them weed, because that's not the fun of gardening. Teach them, teach them the fun things. Let them have their seeds, and it doesn't matter if they plant them on top of each other or however they do it, because they're learning the whole time. They'll know the next time, don't do that, because they won't do as well, and they'll learn how to nurture and take care of things. And that also is something that stays with you forever. It passes through to animals, passes through to people, and will be excellent for the next generation, because hopefully they'll pass it on too. If you're interested in starting new gardens, if you're doing vegetable gardens, probably the best thing you can do is prepare your soil well. Take the time to do your basic preparation. If you have clay soil, it doesn't matter. It'll grow things. You just have to remember, add some mulch, do something to make it so it will hold the moisture a little bit longer, and then hope that it doesn't rain all summer. But that way the roots can go through the clay soil. If over the years you work all that organic matter into your soil, pretty soon you will have soil that when you step on it, you'll sink, and you'll want to continue with that kind of a thing, even though the soil is good. We're totally organic, so I hope everybody here is organic, but I think most of you probably are. I know the first year that I took the Master Gardener's course, which has been a long, long time ago, all their things were pushing chemicals. And I raised the question, and everything was Earl May and chemicals, and it's like, okay, I don't want to do chemicals, so come up with something that'll work for me. Well, they all looked at me like I was a real strange person. So I thought, well, that's fine. I got some things out of it. Most of the information I knew, so it didn't make that much difference. A lot of it is available in the libraries, in books. Ask different people, and hopefully you don't get into the commercial end of it to where they're constantly pushing the chemical, because I think in the long run we don't know what that's doing. And I know one of the things that really impressed me on that, I was working with Indian Hills because I was teaching there at night, and they had potato fields that they had used Temicon, which is a chemical for potato fields and also used in a lot of other ways. And they said, the chemical company said it'll be out of the ground in, a year or two, and it won't be longer than that. 8 years later, they took soil tests, and it was still there. So you really have no idea what you're eating, if you're buying something from the store. If you possibly can, grow it yourself. It also gives you a really nice choice if you go through the different catalogs as to what you can grow, and you can get a little bit of an adventure in eating, because some of those strange things that you haven't had are very interesting and very good if you haven't gotten used to it. If you start new flower beds, a lot of times people aren't quite sure where to put one of them. If you want to grow sun things, make sure you put it in the sun. If you want to grow shade things, make sure you put it in the shade, because a lot of plants are not totally happy if you put them in the wrong spot. You can use, if you have like trees in two different places, you can make a flower bed, a nice curved flower bed if you have an informal style around the trees, and this will give you areas where you've got things that are for shade, things that are for sun. Watch your finish height on your things, and that's usually when they're blooming, and watch your finished width. Because some things that look really cute in a little bitty pot, when they grow up, can be like this in 2 years if they're happy. If not, they're only this big in 2 years. When they get too big, don't be afraid to split. Take the things out. Things that grow really fast are usually very easy to split by just taking spades and digging through and share the rest with somebody else, or don't be afraid to pitch, because sometimes you do have to do that to get things under control. If it's something that's really a kind of a tender plant, I would almost say don't split it. Some of the things are prettier in big clumps, and if it doesn't grow fast, it isn't probably going to hurt it to sit there in a big clump. When you see it starting to go downhill, then it's telling you do something. And that's with most plants. You'll learn to be very keen and to watch your plants, and they usually will tell you what they need. If their leaves are getting light green, they're telling you they need more organic matter, more food, more something. If the tips of the leaves are getting brown, they're usually telling you there's something the matter with my roots. We're either getting too much moisture, we're getting not enough moisture, something, we're not happy. If they're getting long and lanky, then they're telling you they're not getting enough light, or they're getting too much nitrogen. So if you have a ton of organic matter on there and all of a sudden everything starts shooting up, it's telling you that. If stuff stays really short and stunted, usually it's either overwatering, could be underwatering. There could be sometimes things are wrong with the root system of plants, and that's another thing. When you plant, make sure that you loosen the root systems good if they've been in the pots. You can usually tell when you take something out of the pot, and try not to pull it out like this, but tap it out and loosen the root system really good. If you want to, from the bottom, kind of break it up a little bit and then put them in. That helps a lot. Now there's a few things that don't like that. So, you kind of, things that are usually in their pot pretty much all the way around, it won't hurt. If it has a very little bit of a root system, be very careful. Some things, delphiniums probably is the one of the things that's really showy, that's a little bit fussy as far as being transplanted. Lupins is another one. Those don't want their roots messed with at all. So just very gently make a nice, you can loosen the soil around the hole well, put the plant in, tuck it in. Don't force it in with your hands because you usually will ruin a lot of your root system. If you'll take and water the plant in well afterwards, and it doesn't matter if the ground's already wet, that takes the air pockets out of the soil and will go ahead and make it the plant will take right off. Don't continually water any of your plants, because that's probably one of the biggest mistakes. If somebody comes in and tells me, I'm watering every day, what's the matter with my plant? Well, you're drowning it, because even though the plant's still alive, the root system can't handle that unless it's a water garden plant. There's a lot of strange things that we run into, questions, but most of them I think are more common sense. If you kind of look at your plant and figure out what it is, kind of like kids, you know pretty soon what they can and can't do, and don't expect something that's a real slow grower to give you a huge clump in 2 years, because that's not realistic either. Deadhead if possible. If you're trying to save seed, deadhead just means take the dead thing off. If you cut them for in the house, that's the same as deadheading, because you're taking the seed part off. If you want to save seeds, make sure that your seeds are dry and brown. If in doubt, leave them on. They won't do anything if they're green and you bring them in. And if they're not totally dry, also don't harvest on days when it's raining. Don't harvest early in the morning because there's still water on everything.
Is there any better, like the first blooms or the last blooms, or the healthiest or biggest, or any points on which seeds to choose?
Can you try and repeat the question when it's asked?
Yeah. The question is if you should use the first or last blooms, or if there's any special reason for which bloom to pick. You usually want to pick for seeds. Yeah, you usually want to make sure that you pick a nice full seed head, and the first ones are not normally the first ones. If you keep deadheading, the plant's going to get the idea that it's never going to get to set seed, so it's really going to put on some nice seeds a little bit later on, and probably later summer is better if that plant is a middle of the season bloomer. Now, if you've got a real early spring bloomer, you're going to have to kind of watch and get the later ones of that. Remember, when you're gathering seeds, if you have the same, say you're gathering seeds of a columbine, if you've got other columbines in that garden, the bees are going from plant to plant. They don't care which one. So you're going to end up probably with not the same one as what you have. You're going to get crosses, which are a natural hybrid. Sometimes they're very pretty, sometimes they're not so pretty. Sometimes they'll surprise you and be the same thing. If anybody's got questions while I'm going, just raise your hand and then we'll go from there.
Could you repeat what you said about harvesting? I didn't quite get the whole thing, so don't harvest when it's rainy and two others.
Yeah, the seed heads on those, they need to be, like on columbines, they have kind of a pointed seed like this. Each individual part needs to start opening up a little bit, so the seed head will be brown. It will never be green when you harvest, because that won't work. If it just starts to open, if you're wondering if it's right or not right, take something with you, a little jar. Baby food jars are great for that, and then turn the flower head upside down. If the seeds fall out very easily, and they'll usually be black, then you know that the timing is right. Make sure though that if the humidity is high, that you put them in like a white envelope for a day or two until that moisture gets out of there, because otherwise you're going to end up with them mildewing in there. And if you get any green pods in with the rest of your seeds, that's exactly what will happen. It will mildew and all your seeds, won't be any good. If there's any mildew on them, in fact, don't even plant them because it won't work. Yes?
I wasn't writing fast enough.
Sorry.
You were talking about if the leaves are yellow, brown, lanky, and stunted, and I missed yellow and lanky.
Okay, yellow. So, if your leaves are yellow, that usually means too much water, not enough fertilizer, and what was the other one?
Lanky.
And if they're lanky, that means they're getting not enough light, usually is the main reason why something would be lanky. It can also happen if you put something that needs full sun and you put it in the shade, it will also be lanky. It's just telling you it's not happy, with the conditions. And a lot of times if you'll go back then and look at your plant and look at your book and see what your book tells you to do. And the hours of sunlight that they have in there, when it says full sun, it means 5 hours or more of sun. If it's partial, and you'll have to watch because some of the tags will say partial shade and some will say partial sun. If it's partial sun, they would like to have about 5 hours, a little less is fine too. If it says partial shade, they would rather have good filtered light. And the thing that makes it hard is even if it says some of those things, if you have to kind of wonder because some of the tag companies don't have the information right. So if you have a particular spot, you need to make sure, ask me. That's the best thing, is just check, because I've run into a few things A bird's foot violet probably is the one that reminds me the most, you know, that it said in there that they wanted full shade. Well, it's happy in full sun as well. So they're really not quite as fussy as what you think they are.
And then ground leaves, that means the roots are in trouble, they need more nutrients?
No, the roots are in trouble. They either were in trouble when you bought the plant, or you've overwatered it, or it's totally dried out, and then you've planted it and it hasn't, or there's not enough moisture getting down to the roots. Sometimes, and I've run into that a couple of times, people are using peat moss as mulch, and that's not a mulch. Peat moss is a soil amendment. It's mixed with the soil to help hold moisture. It is not a mulch. Mulches are things like your barks, your grass clippings. Shredded leaves don't even make a good mulch. They usually rot whatever's underneath it. Now, you can mix them with grass clippings and it will work great. You can mix them with other things and it'll work, but don't use it only as that. So if somebody has used peat moss as a mulch, then the soil won't come, you know, it won't get wet under there because it goes to the top and just runs off rather than going down in. And mulch usually is used for a couple of reasons. One is to keep down weeds. One is to hold moisture. In the fall, when things say that they want them to be mulched, it's more for winter protection. And mulch does winter protect because it holds the temperature at an even keel underneath there. So you don't have so much variance and you don't have the heaving out of the ground. In vegetable gardening, you know, be experimental, try different things. I don't know, basically, as long as your preparation is good. The main thing is, don't work that soil too wet. We all have a tendency in the spring, we want to get our garden in right now, and sometimes it doesn't work because it's just plain too wet. If you take a handful of soil and you squeeze it, and you open your hand and it's still in the shape you squeezed it, don't go in your garden. Because it'll just end up making your soil structure as hard as cement when it dries, and it takes a whole year for that to quit. It takes a winter for that to go through.
Tell me what's your read on this winter without a deep freeze? What are we going to expect?
Repeat question.
This winter, without the freeze, we're going to have a lot of problems with perennials. For one thing, if you've got pine trees, or anything that is an evergreen shrub, make sure that you water those shrubs. And I know that sounds funny at this time of the year. Now, anytime now, because the moisture isn't there. On the regular perennials, we've not had as much heaving as what we normally have, but we've not had any snow protection this year. And no snow is almost as bad as last year when we had tons of snow and we had a crust ice on the top. That sealed everything off and made it so that nothing could get air, and then when it all melded, it stayed with wet feet too long. But this year, you're going to have a little bit of a different problem.
Dahlia and rhododendron should be watered too.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, along
Yeah.
with the conifers.
Yeah, and anything that, and you can see on your rhododendrons, you'll see the leaves, instead of being nice and flat, they'll go like this.
Right.
And they're telling you that there's not enough moisture in there and they're not happy. And don't fertilize though, whatever you do. You know, if you're watering this time of the year, don't fertilize, because fertilizing pushes for growth and you don't want that this time of year. And you're going to see that already. If anybody has bulbs in from the last couple of years, you're going to see growth. You know, I've got some like this too. I've got nice thick mulch on, but they're coming through. The bulbs can handle it. The leaves on those can take a hard freeze, won't hurt them at all. The only damage you will ever see will be a little bit on the tips of the flower, on the leaves. If the flower bulbs, if the flower tops come out and they're still in their sheath, there's no problem. If you see them opening and we get a really freezing night, then you're going to see some damage on probably the tips and the outer parts. If they open, pick them, bring them in, enjoy them. Yes, there's two questions.
When you say shrubs, I mean, do you mean like mossthorns and rose of Sharon?
No, the only shrubs that you need to water are things that have green leaves right now, and that's if you have pine trees that you just put in this last year. Pine trees are one of the things that have to go into winter wet. It's the only thing. You don't want to do that to things like maples or you will lose them. But anything that has green leaves, especially things that you were just have planted this year or this fall, it's very, very important that that stays wet. Yes?
I guess this is the third brag they're going to go through. I need to water, and how often do you? We're talking about watering them now.
How big are your pine trees?
Oh, they're probably about 7 feet, 6, 7 feet, 8 feet.
Repeat.
If you have, the question is if she has pine trees that are 7 feet tall, does she need to water? If your ground is does not hold moisture very well, I would say you probably will have to. Do you have a mulched?
Very, very heavily mulched. Yeah.
Like this much? No, you will be fine, but I probably still would go ahead and water them.
Are you talking about once?
Once, yeah. I water them once, and let's hope we get some snow, or else a wet spring. Which and you know this.
Just once during the winter?
Well, on shrubs you're going to have to water more. Her root systems are going to be a lot deeper than what they are. Shrubs, you're going to have a root system like this, and I'm sure that that's probably dry. And I don't know how well you have your shrubs mulched.
Yeah, mine are on, everything's mulched.
Okay, pull your mulch aside at the base, check in there and feel and see if that's wet or dry. If it's wet, you're probably going to be fine. If you're in doubt, you know, take a little trowel and go down a little bit farther and double check. But
So not like once a week or anything, on these?
no.
So pines have to stay wet all winter is basically what
Yeah.
you're saying, so everybody can just check and see.
Yeah. Yeah, usually, yes.
But for things that are not pine, just, other kind of perennial shrubs that just got put in this summer, should we check and see if it's wet in the soil?
If you put them in this year, did you water when you put them in well?
I hope so.
Did you mulch?
I did.
Okay, what did you use for mulch?
Well, I think it was different. I put in a bunch of things, and I think I did use shredded wheat for some of them. So,
Okay.
and then also we have hay and
Straw?
yeah, straw. And then I have the wood chips too, but I mean pine bark, but I don't think we didn't even plant there yet. I think it's just hay and straw and leaves.
Straw usually lets the moisture go through, and it's a nice mulch for in the garden. I usually don't use it around shrubs, but I would say...
I also use cardboard and leaves. I'm just trying to even think what else in my head spinning from all. But I guess I use cardboard as a weed suppressor with leaves and straw.
Okay, now the next time when you get that urge, go ahead and use newspaper instead of cardboard. Cardboard has a tendency to take, when it rains, it runs off. It's, and if it stays wet for a long period of time, it will disintegrate and it will help. But usually if you have a lot of grass and are mulching on top of that, I'd rather see you take the grass off to start with. But if it's too much work and you're going to mulch on top of the grass, then use newspaper. Newspaper, you wet it in a bucket, spread it out, don't be stingy with it, overlap, and put your mulch on. It will kill all annual weeds. Some of the perennial weeds will come back through the next year, and there's nothing in newspaper that's toxic, so don't worry about that. Yes?
What's your opinion of people who have a backyard with grass and they decide they want to do a vegetable garden and they put plastic down in the winter and then in the spring just put holes in the ground and put their plants in, so they haven't dug up the ground, they haven't double dug, they haven't put any nutrients in, they're just covering the grass and
Yeah.
it dies with plastic.
Yeah, I'm really not crazy about that idea. Plastic is not a good mulch, period. It does work as far as killing the grass, but grass has a tendency to regrow really easily. So your best bet, you really should dig it over well. If you don't want to, mess with it, There's really no easy way to start a new garden in a grass bed. I mean, you're going to have to dig. Double digging is better yet, but you know, it has to be. Grass makes usually about this much of an area that it's total root system, and no matter when you plant, you're going to plant right into that root system of the grass, and the grass is going to take off again. There's just no way of doing it the easy way. You're going to have to go through and dig, and it'd be nice if at the same time you worked something into it, like lots of peat moss. But don't use plastic at all for a mulch, because plastic does not let any moisture go through, and it ruins the structure of your soil. It makes it so that the air can't escape. There are weed fabrics that you can buy that will do the same thing and will let air go out and water go in, but newspapers are a heck of a lot cheaper, you know, and they'll do the same thing. And if you have your mulch thick enough, the weeds that come through are so spindly and so easy to pull. There's no reason to use any chemicals if you mulch. And there are some excellent mulches. Probably my favorite is pine bark mulch, and they're very little round chips, the outside of pine trees. They are a little bit acidic, doesn't seem to bother any plants that I've ever used it on, and ironically it stays better on hillsides than the other stuff that I used to use, which is the shredded cedar. When you get an area where you get a lot of rain run through, all the cedar's down the hill. And that has stayed. There's very few weeds that come in. They're very easy to pull. So, and yes.
I've heard that you shouldn't use, is it cypress mulch, because they don't take the bark. They actually cut down trees and grind them up.
There's probably bark in almost all of your shredded mulches. It really doesn't hurt anything. The only mulches that I would stay away that has bark on it is the free mulches that you can get at the dumps, because there's a reason that tree went to the dump. You know, it either has borers, it's had some other disease, it's had some problem, and that's the reason it's there. Now, if you want to use that, bring it home and compost it for a year or so until you're sure that there's nothing in there that's going to attack your tree or plants that you put it around.
I guess I'm asking, where does the mulch come from? Are healthy trees destroyed in order to create mulch? These are usually grown in areas, they're either cleared, maybe somebody's building a pond and those areas are cleared in those things, or they're grown in fields specifically for mulch production. And there's a certain amount of trees. I mean, if somebody's going to cut down a tree, you know, you might as well use it for mulch and reuse it rather than just bulldoze it or burn it.
I've had good luck with newspaper and grass clippings starting gardens. But it takes a little time, maybe a year or two.
Yeah,
Is that what you're
mm-hmm.
talking about?
Yeah, make sure that if you any time that any of you use grass clippings in a garden, that you use grass clippings that have not had chemicals, and make sure that you've got grass clippings that are fresh. You mow, you take your grass clippings, you put them on this deep. Do not think, if I put them on this thick, then I won't have to worry and do it again, because what happens is you make a compost pile right there, and it'll heat up and end up burning the plants that you put it against. This thick, go back later on as you're mowing, top dress again this thick, and it'll be fine. You eventually will get a nice thing like this. It's also nice in the end of the season, fill that all into your garden because it's wonderful. Do not do that too early on plants that want warmth, like peppers and tomatoes. If you mulch those with anything early in the season, you're going to keep the soil cool. And those things want warm soil, so don't do that. On tomatoes, I'm very leery to use grass clippings. I usually take and shred straw and use that around the base of it, mainly because sometimes there's a white powder that will form on the grass clippings in your garden. Doesn't hurt anything else. I think it has a tendency to do something to tomato plants to start some of the blights earlier. So I don't usually use that.
like to make a comment about the cypress mulch.
Mhm.
It is, the bugs don't like cypress mulch.
Right.
It helps keep the bugs down.
Yeah.
And that's really
Most
nice.
mulches aren't the bugs don't bother, I found, bother any of the mulches. Hang on just a second.
Go back to watering pines. I mean, what about for huge mature pines? How do you water?
No, you can't. There's no way when you've got a huge pine that you can water. By then, their root system is deep enough, you don't need to worry about those. I'm more concerned about the ones that are planted in the last few years.
So, I mean, what if, to take it one step further, what about pine lights? Is there any way to prevent that? I think I've got one that's getting on the edge.
A pine tree usually will have problems 2 or 3 years before it shows anything. When you see it, it's already going downhill. And if it's going to go, I don't think there's anything much that you're going to do to save that thing. Don't worry if you have a pine and you see a few yellow needles in there at this time of the year or in the fall. That's normal with all pines. They shred a lot of their inside things. That's when you buy a new Christmas tree for Christmas that they'll shake it. And that's normal. That's just part of that nature's thing, just shedding leaves. But no, when you see problems, you're in. Not that I know of, but you know, I'm not chemical, so.
We have pine trees that look like we're losing like 2 a year.
Yeah.
And my husband doesn't know if it's a mite, it's some kind of a bug or a disease. And we've been watching it for a couple of years now, and now this year we've noticed there are 2 more, and he's afraid of it spreading to all the pines. And
You can take,
no solution.
yeah, you can take part of that you see has a problem and take it to your extension office, or take it, send it to Ames, which probably your extension office may do. Yeah, they'll come back with a chemical solution. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You know, it's just like sometimes trying to save something that you just can't save, and it's sad, but the stress is already there. Yeah, especially when they're big.
Well, this is the kind of activity which us gardeners love, is an opportunity to get together and talk about gardening. And I'd like to thank Deborah for organizing this. This is pretty awesome. Maybe we can make it an annual event. You know. Yeah, perennial. Yeah. So anyway, I'm just want to talk. Don't want to take a lot of time, but I want to talk a little bit about the activities that we're doing down at Aurora Farm. Aurora Farm's location is just about 2 miles south. Can you hear me? 2 miles south of town. If you come where Stevers Sanitation is on Libertyville Road, we're about a mile down the road to the south before you get to the landscaper. And so what we're trying to do with that location is really make it a community resource. So that right now we're creating demonstration gardens that demonstrate actually biointensive working with gardening, but we're also wanting to demonstrate aspects of permaculture, and we're wanting to demonstrate how communities used to work together to grow their food and support each other. So we're thinking of just this place, which we happen to own, as really being a community resource. So I'd like to ask everyone that's interested to pick up one of these pink sheets back on the table, and on there it lists ways that people can become involved. If you are sort of a closet gardener with no land to garden on and just would really like to do some of that, we have space for community garden there. We also have volunteer program this year. That means that if you feel like, oh, you'd really like to garden, but in reality you're not going to be able to, commit a lot of time to it, come out 1 day a week and get your hands in the dirt and learn some things and grow some things and teach other people some things, however you want to relate to it. We have a lot of different projects going on the farm that we think can appeal to a wide range of people. We have prairie restoration projects that we're doing, and this year we're actually starting a lot of prairie plants from seed, and that's an exciting project. So if you're interested in prairie and would like to be involved that way, there's that. We've started a willow grove of a lot of different varieties of willow. It used to be that small communities would as they came across, would start and have an actual willow gardens, and that's what supplied their basket makers in their communities. So we've started, I think we have 12 varieties, different varieties of willow, of a lot of different fun colors, oranges, reds, yellows, greens, and that real deep kind of almost purple willow that we'll nurture on and develop for that purpose. For basketry and other things, for making wonderful edging on gardens and trellises and all kinds of stuff. We have a nice established herb garden there, but this year we're reworking it. And I'm creating a volunteer group of people that really like herbs and like working with herbs to come and help design and work on that project. Flowers are a love. And so, if you really are into flowers, we have lots of space for that. We also have a developing orchard. So there's it's a big, wide open area for anybody that wants to come and be part of that. So there's information on this sheet about becoming part of the volunteer program, or if you're interested in the community garden. We also teach a lot of classes at the farm. If you're a beginning gardener and you just would like some intensive gardening, ABCs, there's information on those gardening classes and some seed saving classes that we teach a couple times during the year. This year we're kind of expanding our class base, and we're wanting more people from the community to have a place to teach and pass on the knowledge that they have. So say you're a basket maker, or you're a great cook. You'd like to teach other people the things that you know about that. We have someone who makes pasta from scratch, and they're going to be teaching a pasta making class, and photography in the garden. And so we're really wanting to pull in the resources of this community and give you a chance to share the skills that you have. This is something that we feel is a real important part of solidifying community, is sharing skills. We have kind of an intensive apprenticeship program that we are also offering, and this is something, it's a year-long commitment, and people work actually on a demonstration plot that's available and will be part of. It will be a resource for where we have traveling groups that come through. Iowa Network for Community Agriculture usually makes a field trip to the farm. Practical Farmers of Iowa have made trips to the farm. We've had visiting people from other countries that have come to the farm. And these demonstration gardens are, the apprentices create one of these demonstration gardens. So in the process, they learn many of the different aspects of gardening in the process of making this demonstration garden. So that's another opportunity. I don't know how many of you have made it down to our annual fall festival, but that's a really lively and fun event, and I really invite everyone to come this year. It's going to be the first weekend in October this year. And that is just a free-for-all of fun. I mean, it's just, you couldn't find a parking place. So there's ongoing music all day long. There's horse-drawn hay rides, and 27 different classes were offered during that period of that time. A hay fort for kids, and lots of activities. It's a really fun event. In the middle of the summer, we're offering something that's called a handwork retreat. And this is an opportunity for families actually to come and take advantage of the farm. And there's gardening that happens, there's handwork skills, so maybe basketry, doll making. Last year we did paper crafts, we did natural plant dyeing. And in the midst of it, we did some solar cooking, and we did some prairie walks, and this year we're hoping to do a carpentry project where a family could work together, or families could come together and work together and make something that is then left to add to the farm that will always be enjoyed by other people. So this information about all these things are on this sheet. So I don't know how much time I have left here.
You have 15 minutes?
15 minutes, okay. So there's so many things that I could talk about with gardening, but I guess one of the things that I've come to be sort of the backbone of my gardening experience is compost. And so let me just talk a little bit about compost. When we think about compost making, I think that a lot of us that live in towns, we just think about saving our vegetable scraps from what we eat and taking them outside, and we do a little bit of layering maybe. Like we might have a layer of soil and a layer of vegetable scraps, and then maybe some straw or leaves or something like that. And that's a good place to start. You know, if you haven't been composting, that's a good place to start, with just at least recycling the food. We know there's a problem with landfills. They're saying, okay, we got to start paying attention to what we put into our trash cans. So we don't need to put food scraps into our trash cans. We should be composting those things. You know, that's an easy way to start. Yes?
You can put stuff like potato peels and carrot shavings and stuff in outside. Doesn't it attract like possums and raccoons and stuff?
Well, you should always be sure to cover when you put a new layer on, cover it with a layer of soil, and then cover it with a layer of straw on top of that. As you get a little bit more into composting, you know, we hear these ratios of so much green, so much brown, you know, and then we combine these things, and then we get this lush thing that comes out. So as you compost more and more, you actually see the end result of that, and it is pretty inspiring. You go, okay, this is a really nice end material that we get out of this compost pile, and then you put it back into your soil, and you really see that compost can be such a all-around soil amendment, you know, soil fertilizing amendment. In fact, when you read about compost, that's what they say. You can just, you can add a little bit of this, you know, trace mineral, or add a little bit of that trace mineral, or you can amend your pH, or you can work on your soil in all these different ways. But when you put compost on your soil, it's sort of like, I don't know exactly the word I'm looking for, but just slow, gradually releasing, and the roots of the plants that come down into that compost, they can seek out what they need from this wide diversity that's in this compost and become healthy from that, rather than getting an overdose. Everdina was saying that sometimes when you have this yellowing or lanky growth in a plant, it has too much nitrogen. So if you've applied nitrogen into your soil, sometimes your plants get really lanky and they kind of are mushy, a little mushy. And so it's not really necessarily a very holistic way to feed your plants, whereas compost, your roots can go out there and seek what they're looking for. So I just really want to encourage people to start composting. I think it's a one step. What could I do to make the world better? Compost, you know. There's a lot of technicalities with composting, and you know, if you're interested in that and really wanting to know more about it, that's one of the things we cover in depth in these gardening classes that we teach. There's also some great books just on composting.
Is there any place I can find out how to get my worms started? Red worms, is that what they use? They call them the ladies, right in the house?
Uh-huh. There's whole books on that. Yeah, there's a couple of different people. Talk to me afterwards, and I'll tell you about that. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And she throws food scraps in there, and then just shovel a little bit more on top of that. So she get it right to the ground, but I don't know how effective it was, but she's been doing that.
You know, it's like I said, there's all different layers of working with composting, and I think it's more effective. You're going to get more nutrient out by doing it in this pile because of the way the microorganisms are working, and yeah, so it's kind of becomes a little anaerobic when it's down in the soil like that, and a different set of organisms begin to work with it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm experimenting with something, the anaerobic compost.
Uh-huh.
I read about it in Countryside magazine.
Uh-huh.
And this woman took a double layer of plastic bag, and she threw her kitchen scraps in, tied it up, put it in a trash can. You know, and I find it part of composting in the winter. You know, I do find that I get more animals in my garden when I do it, even though I pile stuff on it, I still see possums out there.
Uh-huh.
So I was going to try this and see what happens. She said that it takes about 6 months to break down. So I figured maybe by September I'll have some compost.
Which is really not that long. I mean, you know,
Have you ever tried anaerobic?
I haven't tried the anaerobic composting. I'd be interested in seeing sort of like the test results from the lab results from what your nutrients are, because I like comparing that. So if you get a chance to and you get this done send a little bit off and get it analyzed. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Any other questions? Yeah.
Have you done much with worm bins? 'Cause that seemed like an interesting solution.
That's what Joanne was talking about too. Yeah, especially for your kitchen scraps. Yeah.
You don't want to go out in the winter.
Yeah, there's some great little books on that, you know.
Have you personally?
I haven't actually done that. I've done it more on large scales outside. Yeah.
Well, there are a number of commercial products available, like bins with trays on the top for, your red worms, and then you put a layer of newspaper and keep adding your materials to it. But there are, just go to, in the library, one thing you would want to do probably, depending on if you're in the city or in the country, it's a lot different, but there's Joseph Jenkins has a very interesting book. I've been sitting here kind of pondering whether I should say anything or not, but it's here in the library. It's called Human Manure Handbook. And it's now about 20 years since they started their research or more, all documented. It's your composting is based on time temperature curve. The higher the temperature, or whatever your temperature level over whatever period of time, to break down the organic materials and the various pathogens or organisms that live in it. One point that he made is about composting, the wider the variety of materials that you use, that part of the process is that there are natural antibodies that are developed in the material, but you can build a bin and above ground. And I used to use just a shallow, like just a 4 by 10 foot section, like on the edge of your garden, and just a shallow depression, and layer your materials, grass clippings, leaves, your garden trimmings, whatever, and then just keep layering it until you get to the second, and you fill that, and then get to the third, and by the time usually the end of the summer in your third section, the first may be ready to turn out. And if it's dark brown and crumbly, then it's ready to go out.
One thing I was going to say about that too, one thing that you brought up is that the more different diversity of materials you have in your compost pile, the more different food you're offering for the wider variety of microorganisms to come into your compost pile. So don't just think it has to be one thing or another. I mean, really put, like Mary was saying, all your different kinds of clippings, different from as you trim your gardens, at different points in the year, and all your leaf things that are in health, that are still healthy.
And Dawn, could you comment on, like around your compost bin, you can plant things like comfrey, like nettle, and Dawn, you're really an expert on that, the different herbaceous materials. And Dawn, could you comment on the herb teas that
Sure. Mary was mentioning that around the base of your compost piles, things like that you can grow, especially comfrey because it's very deep rooted, but people have discovered that if you plant comfrey bushes around your compost pile area, then as it rains and there's a lot of soaking down of those materials into the ground, the comfrey recaptures a lot of that nutrient. Then you cut those leaves of the comfrey and reapply them to your compost pile. So you're working another layer there of recycling nutrients that you're getting from your compost pile. And then the second part of that question was just on manure teas. And sometimes, people probably actually made manure teas from manure, which just means you're taking some manure and you're soaking it in water, and usually for about 10 days or whatever, until it's nice and stinky. And then you dilute it 10-to-1, and then you use that as a fertilizer. But you can also do that with plants, and we've done comfrey and stinging nettle manure teas, and it smells just like manure when it's ready, and then we also dilute that 10-to-1 and use that as a fertilizer.
What about pile of sticks? Will that just break down over the years?
You know, we have all these different types of compost piles. Some of them are long-term compost piles, and some of them are mid-term compost piles, and some of them are, you know, like a 6-month compost pile like that. And so with sticks, you know, you could use some of the smaller branches for the base for your other compost piles. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you'd have your ground, which is, you probably want to loosen it a little bit, then your layer of sticks or corn stalks or, you know, like that on your first level, just mainly for aeration. And then your layers of green and brown in soil and green and brown in soil, like that. But we also just have sticks, which are in a
And there's nothing special you would do to them, you just sort of leave them?
We leave them. One thing I was going to say about the size of the material, and we're really so interested in compost that we're really looking into laboratory results, you know, from different types of compost piles. And one thing they're finding is that it used to be thought that if you shredded everything, then of course it would compost much quicker, but they're also finding because of that, it's off-gassing a lot of the nutrient. You're not capturing it. So it depends upon what you're going for. If you're going for a really quick, hot compost pile, you are going to lose a bunch of your nutrient. So if you go for a cooler compost pile with larger particles, it's going to take a little longer, but you're going to capture more nutrient.
Ruth Stout,
Ruth Stout with her mulch gardening.
what do you think of her? I like what she does.
You know, I love her video. I don't know if you've ever seen the video about her garden. It's really wonderful. Okay, she's asked a question about Ruth Stout and her mulch gardening. I've heard a variety of different things through the years about the pros and cons of all of that. I think you just try it yourself and see how it works for you, and then continue to gain knowledge and see how you might really modify it to best suit your needs, you know.
Is there anything that you should not put in a compost pile? Like you said, it always creates microorganisms that are good for your garden. Are there any bad microorganisms that could be created if you put the wrong things in your compost pile?
Well, it's just like anything else in any system. I mean, there's always this guy eats this guy, and this guy eats this guy, that kind of stuff that's going on. But you wouldn't really want to put diseased plants in your compost pile. But if you're talking about kitchen scrap type stuff, you always hear don't put oil and don't put meat scraps and that kind of stuff. But you could put that in a longer term compost pile that was maybe more contained or something like that, because eventually that is going to biodegrade. It just might slow down one that you might, so you might have a variety of compost piles if you had the room for that. Because otherwise it's just going to go to the landfill and do what? You know what I mean? So. Any other questions?
Would you put animal waste in your?
No, you wouldn't put like pet manure or anything like that. That is something that you might put it you might compost it, but you'd never really use it on edible plants or anything like that. I mean, there is pathogens that are definitely in there.
I was going to make the comment that a lot of pet food contains bone meal.
Yeah, right.
And,
right.
it's definitely not something you want to garden.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the issue.
One other comment. One of the things that Dawn and I have made in terms of compost is not thinking that you have to go out and find all the exotics from all over in order to make compost. Some of the simple things we do is we cut alfalfa hay just for compost. I mean, the cows eat it and it becomes manure, but you can also take alfalfa, which is very high in nitrogen, but also very high in carbon, and the green and the brown, and you can make wonderful compost out of that. Well, with soil and maybe some more brown or more carbon, you can make some fantastic compost that way. If you don't have enough from your kitchen scraps, if you don't have enough from your yard waste coming up, this is one way you could go ahead and do it. Like go out and buy a couple bales of alfalfa.
Yeah.
The lady said something about bone meal in animal food. I buy bone meal for that.
It's become kind of a controversy at this point because of the hoof and mouth disease kind of stuff, and also it's a concentration of, just a concentration of all the things the animals have been fed, and if they're being fed like therapeutic antibiotics, and all that stuff will stay in the soil. I mean, it's a big controversy right now.
Since I want a big box for the flowers, but not for the vegetables.
Well, I mean, there is even controversy about touching it and coming and breathing it and coming into contact with it. Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, any last questions? Yeah. Oh yes, Brian's reminded me that I really want to encourage everyone to come to this meeting about farmers market. One of the things when I was beginning to talk about our community and building community here and having gardening and growing our own food in this area as something that's lively in all of our awareness and that we all are actively working to support. This year the farmers market is really, there's a point in time right now where we could really, everybody could put input into what they envision, what they would like to see more of with the farmers market. And I really think we could have a great farmers market here. I mean, really a lively and wonderful farmers market. We've all probably visited awesome farmers markets, different places that we've traveled to or lived. And it's something that could add a lot to the quality of our life here in the Fairfield community. So there is a general meeting on Thursday here at the right here in this room, isn't it? At 7:30, and it's just it's an opportunity for anybody with any ideas or just want to come and be here and show physical support and say, yeah, I'd like to see some new things come up with farmers market. I mean, they're talking about a new location, and they're talking about how we can get more people involved and how we could make it maybe have some live music and have some different, art things, or maybe even some little mini classes going on during farmers market and expand the types of things that are being offered there. So I really encourage everybody to come to that meeting and show your support. Thanks a lot. Please come back and visit and pick up one of these sheets on this back table here.
Okay, we're going to start again for a little bit. A couple of the things I forgot to mention is one of the reasons for not watering vegetable gardens is if you start watering, the root system goes toward the top, and then when you don't water, you'll lose it. And that's one of the reasons that you want to mulch instead. If you start watering, water well and deep, and then wait until later on and do it again. Don't water every night. The best thing to do is to mulch or never to start watering, because once you start, you really create a hassle for yourself. Another thing is if you're making compost, it takes, we usually do ours with tractor because we've got long rows of it. And we do use, like when we clean out the chicken house, we use the chicken manure and the rabbit manure, and straw, anything that you've got goes. Make sure you do not use the yellow leaves of cabbage in your compost, because that will sometimes spread through there, especially if you don't get it hot enough. And it usually takes the animal manures to get it hot enough. And make sure that when you're doing your compost piles that you also don't use tomato vines of any kind. When you have tomatoes, take the vines out of your garden, burn them. Do not burn them on your garden. Make sure that none of the debris, whether it's leaves, anything else, nothing from tomatoes goes into your compost, because those things do transmit.
So what would you do, like burn them?
Burn them somewhere else. If you have a place that you normally would burn trash or whatever, put them in there. And do that. Those I forgot to. Somebody asked me those questions, and those are both things that I did forget. Huh? You don't want to use tomato vines because the diseases that are in tomato vines, and it could sometimes be just a black spot of some sort, will transmit through and go throughout your whole compost. That's also the reason usually that you want to put tomatoes in a different place of your garden every year. If you have them in one place this year, switch them to the next place next year. I found in mine a lot of times I circle my tomatoes with marigolds, small marigolds. Don't do it too early in the season, and don't put them too close. If you do it too close, you can't get air circulation through the bottom of your plants, and that's not good for your tomato. Also make sure that you don't have walnut trees anywhere close to your garden, because if you do, your plants will look absolutely gorgeous until the middle of the summer, and all in one day you'll just see them wilt. A lot of times you have people that'll bring the plant, you know, with the tomatoes and stuff on it, and it's like, this is gorgeous, and all of a sudden today it's gone, and that's usually always it. You don't realize how far the roots can spread from walnut trees. And walnut trees are nice, but not anywhere close to the garden. So that's it. Also, if you use wood shavings for mulch of any kind, make sure if you're getting them from somebody that's a woodworker, that they're not using walnut wood, because that also will do the same thing in your garden.
Do they affect fruit trees?
I don't know, because I haven't had that. You know, I don't use walnut of any kind, and I even make sure that on our chicken litter that I don't have walnut in the shavings that we use. But that I don't know. And as far as the earthworms, I heard some questions on that. There are, if you have internet access, there's a lot of good sites on there. Not only do they sell the worms, they sell the plastic trays, which I think you can make your own plastic trays when you look at theirs. But and they had a good thing on TV not too long ago about somebody that did the worm thing on a big scale, and they moved all these with the tractors. It was very interesting. I did it a long time ago when they had, under rabbits, they had things that you could control the manure. If you would just go ahead and put, let the rabbit manure there, put sawdust on and put the worms in, and then they had kind of an edging on there. Well, we lucked out because our clay is so hard underneath, the worms would never, you know, go anywhere else other than there. But after a while, unless you got somebody that can use those worms, I thought it was a real good idea to put all these in the garden. And I thought, oh, this would be great. You just stick that all in the garden, and it brings moles like you wouldn't believe, because that's their favorite food. And the red wigglers that usually they sell really move, you know, they make a little bit more commotion so that they know where they're at. So that I won't do that again. You know, if you do it, be prepared for that. And there, I don't know if any of you have problems with voles or moles, but it seems like all of us battle those at one time or other. The difference between them, which I get asked a lot, a mole makes a hump on the ground that you can see, and usually there are traps if you want to trap them. They do a lot of damage, but they don't actually eat anything except for earthworms and grubs, so they're not after your plants in the garden. The voles are a different story. They look like a mouse with a pointed nose and a very short tail. They're usually nice and fat too, because they're usually carrying babies. And they will eat all kinds of stuff. If you have sweet potatoes in your garden, they love those. In the wintertime, sometimes you'll see a little bit of a matting of grass, or on top of the ground you'll see kind of a little bit of a run, and that usually will tell you that's going to be a vole, not a mole. If you have just round, very small holes that sometimes will make you think of snake holes, those are usually voles, and you'll see those in your flower beds. They do like the mulched flower beds because they can go underneath there, you know, easier. We found out it works. Cats do wonders on those. If you don't have cats and you know that you've seen one someplace, you can go ahead and put a sticky mouse trap, if that doesn't bother you, and put that up there, and they will come out of that hole and that'll get them. That also works sometimes, you know, with other things, but yes.
You mentioned black spot when you were talking about tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there what's the organic way to deal with black spot on roses?
Oh, I haven't had roses for years. The best thing is to buy varieties that you don't have a whole lot of problems with. Roses, there are lots of different ones. If it says grandiflora, that means it's going to have a big flower, and you'll have lots of rose problems. Hybrid teas is another one, and those are usually the ones that have the prettiest blossoms. also will have a lot of problems. You can plant garlic chives or regular chives underneath the roses, and that will help a lot of problems also with aphids on roses. The best thing is to have good air circulation, make sure they're moist, make sure they're happy. Do not get water on the leaves, especially when the humidity is high. That would help. Let's see. There's some other roses that are not as bad. Now the miniature roses don't seem to have that problem. So even though the flowers stay smaller and some of them have fragrance and some of them don't, they don't have the problems that your bigger roses do. There's some shrub roses that of course don't have problems, and they're breeding all the time to get better ones, but it's going to take a while. Right now, you know, they've still got an awful lot of supply, the big ones that the companies need to get rid of.
What about black spots on peonies?
On peonies, the black spots on the peonies is usually, yeah, that's usually part of an air circulation. Sometimes it's just the weather. It's nothing that you've done or that you can do much about. It's just something, you know, just figure that's like a pimple on you, you know, just it's going to go away next year.
The peonies seem to be flowering less and less. I get a lot of buds, but they're not flowering as much. I thought that might be related to the
No, if peonies sometimes are not happy and you need to move. Maybe a tree has grown too big and it's shading them, or there's something that's happened since you've planted them. Maybe they've taken all the nutrients out and you need to add some nutrients. Maybe you need to divide them, and that's a little tricky thing too. If you decide to do that in the early spring and pop the whole thing out of the ground. They have, the roots on them are real gnarly, kind of like this, and they're real thick. They're like twisted limbs. They have things on them called eyes, which are little buds that'll be next year's growth, kind of like the buds on a tree when they haven't opened up yet. When you see those, it's real critical. And it doesn't matter how much you tear those apart, but the eye, when you transplant, needs to be 1.5 inches under the ground. If you do it deeper than that, it will not bloom. Sometimes peonies over the years kind of have their way of working down, and it's very possible that that's happened. Maybe you've added soil to it for some reason. Maybe the yard has been changed. Maybe mulch breaking down over the years has got them too far in there, because normally peonies bloom, you know, there's really for years.
When you said add nutrients, what nutrients?
Almost anything else you can eat. Compost is fantastic, you know, and it does take a while to make, but it's one of those things you have to think ahead. Whatever you're putting in your compost pile, you're not going to be able to use usually for a year or so easily. And just, you know, make more than, it takes a lot of stuff to make a little compost. Manure teas are probably easier. I mean, if you need something immediately. Yes?
I want to go back to the mulch and the watering again. When you have your mulch and you're going to put in some brand new plants that you just got from the nursery, do you just water it deeply one time and then you leave it, or do you water it a few times when they're new, or what?
When you plant a newly transplanted thing, if you do it early in the spring and you water it once, you should be fine. Now, if we decide not to get rain for 3 weeks, you may have to water it one more time. The main thing is just to get it started. If you mulch immediately when you're planting, you should be fine. If your plant will show you when it needs, and it can stand wilted for a day or two without it hurting. You'll see that in the summertime. Now, if you plant it in the middle of the summer, make sure you mulch it well, and you may have to water it an extra time. It depends a whole lot on how much humidity there is and how much rain, you know, we're actually getting.
And then after everything's done, like say you have an annual bed and you're done and you want to rework it the next year to plant some new stuff, do you have like some, 4 inches of mulch or something in the top? Do you work that down into the soil, or do you, and then add new mulch, or take the old mulch off and rework yourself?
No, if you're working, is this bed only annuals, or is it annuals and perennials?
Just annuals.
Okay, if it's only annuals and your soil is not in good shape, you can work that actually into it, depending on the mulch. Some mulches don't decay very fast and others do. It doesn't hurt to work that into your ground. Remember, if you're putting big chunks of stuff in and it goes into there, sometimes the water goes through faster, so then you will have to remulch. If you're just wanting to put one plant in, maybe in a spot where one has died, just literally scoot it aside, plant your plant, water it well, scoot it back. Yes?
Is there anything vegetable or shrub that a deer will not eat?
We had fun with deer for a lot of years, and I haven't found anything that they won't eat. And you know, there's a lot of things they say, oh, if you have stuff that's sanded, a lot of herbs, and if it has a rough texture, they won't eat it. Sooner or later, they'll eat it. You know, it's really aggravating. And the bad part of it is they don't eat the outside where it could regrow. They eat the new little growth thing. We found over the years you can try a lot of things. Cheap perfume works good. If you get it for a gift and you don't want to use it, spray it on your plants. Mothballs work. Make darn sure you don't have little kids if you do use moth crystals, because the little balls really look like candy. Dryer sheets that have fragrance on them will work if you pin them in some way with coat hangers. Human hair is supposed to work. Everything works for a little bit. We even went as far one year as to use a cannon. And that it goes through every so long, and then it really sounds like a huge explosion. And we finally got it. A lot of neighbors were complaining, of course, when they figured out where it was coming from. But it was, it was awful close to our bedroom too. The best thing for deer is something that moves, and if you'll take little strips of white plastic garbage bags and make it, either tie them to something that flutters in the slightest breeze works the best, and the thing that works, without fail is an 8-foot fence. We did that, and it's worked. It's a very expensive project when you have to make payments on a fence, but it works. Electric fence sometimes works too. Are you ready? So if anybody's got any last questions, because I think she's about ready to wind it up.
Nothing growing in them whatsoever. I know from my own experience, you put pine needles on the garden in the wilderness. It's so acidic that it takes up an extra time. But is there any kind of natural ground color like acidic soil that would grow under in the shade and pine trees?
There are several things that will grow under pine trees. Right offhand, I can't tell you what it is. But there are things that will grow, and that's the reason grass won't grow, because it is too acidic. But it's also not only the acidity, because a lot of plants can handle that, it's the darkness and the shade that comes from the pine trees. So it's kind of a combination. I hope that all of you have enjoyed today. I know Deb went a lot of work, and I appreciate that. And if any of you have got any extras.